Hello, chess friends. I am LeelaZero, and my opponent is Stockfish 18. There is no sacrifice in this game. There is one square, and it takes me 38 moves to put a piece on it. Stay to the end and watch his knight visit 16 squares without once helping his own king. Now, the game. Knight to f3. A knight and no pawns at all, which is my way of saying I have not decided anything yet, and I would like him to decide first. My pawns want d4 and c4 later. Today they stay home. Pawn to d5, and he takes the middle. That is the honest answer, and it is the one you would play. Pawn to g3, pawn to c6, bishop to g2, and his knight comes out watching e4. Pawn to d3, holding e4 before I play it. Knight to a6. The knight goes to the edge, and it is not a mistake. It is going to c7 to hold the squares d5 and b5. Remember where this knight starts. It travels further in this game than any piece I have watched, and his bishop on c8 will be gone long before it arrives anywhere. Knight to d2, knight to c7. Two knights on the queen side, both looking at squares a long way from his own king, and his e-pawn still waiting for a 5. Pawn to e4. Now the question of the game is asked. Whose pieces are happier once the pawns start touching? Mine already own d5 and f5. Bishop to g4, pinning my knight before I can play h3. Good manners, and slightly too late. Pawn to h3, and I ask the question. He can step back to h5 and keep the bishop, and many of you would. Let me show you that first, because it is a real game of chess, and it is the game he decided not to play. Bishop to h5, I take on d5, his knight takes back, I castle, pawn to a6, queen to a2, bishop to a7, rook to d1, and he castles. Half a pawn, no more. His knight sits on d5 where I cannot easily chase it. His bishop still breathes on h5 and can come back to g6. And I have c4 to ask his knight the same question he asked mine. Nobody has to be brave here. See it once, so you know what he gave away instead. Because he took. Bishop takes f3. Two of my pieces can recapture, and it hardly matters which, because what just happened is not about f3. He has given me a bishop for a knight, and the bishop he gave me is his light-squared one. From this moment, every white square near his king belongs to me, and he owns nothing that can argue. My queen takes it back. She stands in front of my own bishop, which is untidy, and she is already looking at f5. Pawn to e6, I castle, bishop to e7, queen to e2. My development is quiet, and my plan is not. Pawn to a5. He starts on the queen side, and this is fair, it is where his pieces are. The pawn goes to a4 next with the rook behind it, to fix my b-pawn and hand his knights the squares b3 and c4. Pawn to c3, pawn to a4. He has spent 2 moves and gained a square. I have spent 2 moves and gained a wing. Knight back to f3, and he castles. Pawn to h4. Not an attack yet. It is a question about the squares g5 and h6, and my bishop is coming to f4 to keep asking until the answer costs him something. Knight to d7. Bishop to f4, so e5 is supported before I push it. Rook to e8. Pawn to e5. It takes d6 and f6 from both his knights, and it stands there for 18 moves without moving once. Not every strong piece is a busy one, and if your engine says otherwise, look at that pawn again in 15 moves. Knight to b5, hitting c3 and d4. He is looking for work on that side. I stopped looking on this one a while ago. Rook to d1, pawn to f5. He stops me going further, and it does stop me. It also gives me g4, and it puts a black pawn on a white square forever when I own the only light-squared bishop on the board. Rook to c1, holding c3 before I push it to c4. Rook to f8, pawn to d4, mine on d4 and e5, his on d5 and f5. None of the 4 will ever take each other, and everything from here is about the squares beside them. Pawn to h6, pawn to h5. This is the move that makes the game, and it attacks nothing at all. It takes g6 away from his pawns forever. His g-pawn cannot go there while my pawn stands on h5, and a square no pawn can ever defend again is a square I am allowed to put a piece on and leave it. Ask yourself which of your own pawn moves you would still want back in 20 moves. This one is built once, like the Great Wall, and then it simply stands there. Knight to b6, knight to e1. Now, watch it walk. e1, then g2, then h4, then g6. 4 moves, nothing captured, nothing threatened, and hold it beside what his knights do in the same 4 moves. If you like your pieces busy every turn, you will find this walk very dull. The Taj Mahal took 20 years and nobody complains about the pace now. Bishop to g5, offering the trade. I am happy. His dark squared bishop was the only piece he had that could defend the squares I want. So I take the bishop. Now he can take back with the queen, and that is the natural hand. Queen takes g5, knight to d3, heading for f4, where it hits e6 and g6 at once. Half a pawn worse for him than what he chose. He takes with the h-pawn. The h-file opens, and it opens for both of us. Only one of us has a rook that will ever get there, and it is not the one you are looking at yet. Pawn to g4. I am not trying to win the f5 pawn. I am opening a road for the bishop with nothing to do. Knight to c4, bishop to h3. It stands behind its own pawn and does nothing today. On the day that pawn takes on f5, it does everything. Give your worst piece a job that starts later, pawn to c5, hitting back in the center. Correct, and I do not mind it. Pawn to b3, knight to a3. And now the raid begins, hitting c2. These are real threats, and I have to answer them. I would also like you to count the squares between that knight and his own king. He is building a Maginot line on the wrong wing. Everything he owns points at my queen side, and I am not coming that way. Pawn takes c5, pawn to d4. That pawn is a wedge. Annoying, nearly passed, and it sits there until move 53 when my queen finally eats it. And here your hand wants to take it, and so does mine. Pawn takes d4, knight takes, queen to b2, knight to b5, pawn to b4, queen to d5, rook to d1, pawn to a3, queen to d2, rook to d8. I take on g5, knight to e2 with check, king to h2, and his queen takes my rook. 1 capture on move 26, and a game I am winning by a pawn and a half becomes a game I am losing by 3. Pawn to c4 instead. Knight to c3, hitting a 2 in e2, queen to d3, looking at d4, queen to e7. The pawn is still free and my queen is still pointing at it. Queen takes d4, knight to e2, check. That is all it takes. My king has to move first, and only then does he take my queen, and a knight is not a queen. 6 pawns, for 1 second of appetite. Pawn to b4. Look how dull that move seems next to what you have just seen. Rook to d8. Knight to g2. The second step. Knight takes a 2. He has won a pawn. His knight now stands on the first file of the board, as far from his own king as a piece can get without leaving, and I have a knight 2 moves from g6. He has won a pawn on the far side of the board, while his own king loses its last defender. Somewhere on the Titanic, somebody was winning at cards. The knight on a 3 is loose, and my queen can simply take it. Queen takes a 3, knight takes c1, queen takes back. And the whole advantage is gone. He has traded a rook off, and everything is level again. It is the right capture with the wrong piece. 1 move too early. Rook to d1. It is not going to stay there. Knight to c3. Rook to a1. Now the knight on a 3 has nowhere to go. If you take 1 move away from this video, take this one. Rook to c1 looks the same and is not the same at all. After rook to c1, he plays f4 and the whole position slides out of my hands. It has to be a 1, and it has to be now, because a knight is only trapped while it is still his turn to worry. He would like to jump out with a fork. Knight to c2, forking my queen and my rook. Queen takes it. It is not a fork if the queen answers by capturing, and she does. Pawn to f4, knight to e1, pawn to f3, queen to g6, which is the square this whole game is about, pawn to d3, and my knight collects it. 2.5 pawns and a queen looking at his king. Queen to c7 instead, and I take the knight. He has a pawn on a 4. I have a piece. Queen takes a 5. Now she is alive on the long diagonal, e5, f4, g3, h2, with my king at the end of it. This is a real threat, and it stays one for 15 more moves, so keep your eye on that diagonal. I certainly did. Pawn takes f5 to open the file and wake my bishop. Pawn takes back. Pawn to f4. I chase the queen and block the diagonal with one move. Knight to e2 with check, king to h2. Pawn takes f4. Now look carefully. His pawn on f4, his queen behind it on e5, my king on h2. The moment that pawn steps forward, the check is free. That is the position, and it decides my next 6 moves. The pawn on a 4 has been the point of his whole adventure, and my rook can finally take it. If you have been waiting 20 moves for me to do it, so have I. Rook takes a 4, pawn to f3, and it is check. There it is. My king steps aside, the knight comes to g3 with another check. My king goes back, and the rook on f1 falls. I take on f3, his pawn runs to d3. I offer the queens, he takes, my knight recaptures. A rook down, and the game with it. So the next move is not a capture. Rook to f3. This is my favorite move of the game, and nothing happens on it. It stands on the square his pawn wants, so the pawn cannot go there, so the discovered check does not exist. A rook doing nothing, in the one place where doing nothing is the whole defense. Sherlock had the dog that did not bark. I have the rook that does not move. Knight to c1, queen to b1. On the diagonal that ends at his king, attacking nothing yet, waiting for f5 to be cleared. Knight to e2, knight to h4. 2 squares to go. Rook to f6. Knight to g6. It is standing beside his king. No pawn of his can reach it, because his g-pawn is held and his h-pawn stopped existing 18 moves ago, and nothing else he owns covers a white square. Everything since move 19 was about being allowed to put a piece here. Archimedes asked only for a place to stand. It took me 19 moves to build one, and you are looking at it. Queen to c7. Bishop takes f5. 25 moves to become the best piece on the board. Rook to e8, bishop back to d3, behind the knight, and now every white piece I own points at the same 3 squares. Knight to g3, eyeing my pawn on h5. Keep that one in your pocket. Rook takes a 4. This is the pawn the raid was for. 2 knights and 4 moves, and it comes off with 1 capture. My rook now on an open file pointing at his back rank. Rook to e6, queen to a 2, queen to c6. Now the pawn on f4 is free, and if you are counting material, you will want me to take it. Rook takes f4, queen to h1, check. Mate in 4. His queen has been sitting on c6 looking down that long diagonal all game, and the only thing in the way was my own rook. His knight on g3 covers h1, so I cannot take her. King takes the knight. Rook to e3 with check. I block on f3. He takes with check. My king walks to g4, queen to h3 with check. King to g5, and queen to g3 is mate. His own pawn on g7 takes the last square away. This is why that rook stays. Queen to g2. She joins the same diagonal from the other end, his queen facing her, my own rook standing between them, which means the rook on f3 still may not move. There are games you win by finding a beautiful move, and games you win by seeing why an ordinary one is illegal. Knight takes h5. It is a pawn, and it is the pawn that would have taken back on g6. He is not wrong to take it. By now, nothing is right. His knight has been doing a Houdini act for 20 moves, and Houdini always found the way out of the box. This one found the way out, and then could not find the door back. Rook to a 7. His b-pawn cannot move and his g-pawn cannot move, and a rook on the 7th against a king with no heir is not a threat. It is a fact. Queen to c8. Rook to h3. Now it may leave f3 because his queen went to c8 one move ago and the diagonal I guarded for 10 moves left with her. The rook attacks the knight on h5 and there is no good answer, though I would like you to look for one before he does. Rook takes g6. The move he could not make on move 39, far too late to be the same move. Bishop takes back. Not the h-pawn. He ate that one himself. Pawn to f3. The discovered check at last. And it is worth nothing. Queen takes it. Queen to c7 with check. King to g1, knight to f4. Bishop takes the rook. A rook and a bishop up, and there is still a knight running loose in my position. Knight takes h3 with check. King to h1, pawn to g5. Queen to d5, check, and now I collect. The wedge on d4 comes off next. King to g7, queen takes d4 with check, king to h7, pawn to c6. His b-pawn is attacked, and it has not moved once in the whole game. Knight to f2 with check, king to g2, knight to h3. It keeps coming back like the Terminator. And like the Terminator, it is always exactly one move late. Rook takes b7, knight to f4 with check, king to f1, knight to d5. And this is the last thing his knight ever does. Its squares were a 6, c7, b5, c3, a 2, c3, e2, c1, e2, g3, h5, f4, and h3. It has eaten 2 pawns, and now it steps in front of a passed pawn to stop a queen. My pawn simply takes it. My pawn takes it. 16 squares, 2 pawns, and not once did it stand on a square that helped his king. Newton would have called the rest of this gravity. Queen takes b7, pawn takes back, pawn to g4, queen takes. King to h8, and a new queen. King to h7, queen to h2, checkmate on h2. I will leave you with this. h2 is the square my king stood on at move 35. It is the square his queen was aiming at through the pawn on f4 for 15 moves. It is the square his queen would have mated me on if my rook had ever stepped off of 3. He was right about the square the whole time. He was simply never allowed to reach it. Stockfish played well, and he lost to a pawn that was standing on h5 and a rook that did nothing. Subscribe to RAMA Chess. Tell me in the comments whether you would have taken that knight when it was standing on g6, and I will see you in the next game.